my first Cosmoverse, I need a clicker. So today's talk, I'm going to take a little different approach. I mean, it's not too much about Akash. Today we have all these new terms, DeepIn, RWAs, DeFi, regulation, and all these, like we get too caught up in like what is going on, and more often than not, we forget why we're here, right? Why we began on this incredible decentralization journey, why Cosmos, and why are we really doing what we're doing, right? My name is Greg. Sorry, my bad. So picture this. In 1969, the first and most widely adopted decentralized network was created to withstand a nuclear attack. And today, we end up with 4 companies controlling the internet. And if you ask me why we're here, why we're here doing what we're doing, my answer is, have we really forgotten the very principles that gave birth to this digital age? My name is Greg Osuri. I'm the founder, CEO for Overclock Labs. I am an open source maintainer for about 15 years of my life. Prior to Akash, I founded a company called Angel Hack, and that led me to creation of Akash. Got notoriety in the open source world for writing some code. Been trending in the Golang category as a top 4 developer, only human being on the list, and pretty top ranks across the board for all languages. So if you look back the history of computing, it really began with centralization, right? You had mainframes, you come to the mainframe and use you borrow the time from the mainframe and use that for a little bit, and then the shift towards decentralization happened with the advent of personal computers and eventually the mobile phone, right? With personal computers, the power was distributed in a way that it was extremely useful. I mean, so useful that by networking these distributed nodes, we ended up with the internet. So traditionally, distributed networks built on open protocols is what historically led to the decentralization. Or the decentralization really spurred the innovation and accessibility we have today. And what happened? We suddenly have this thing called a cloud. And the reason for that is, as we started moving away from personal computers to mobile phones, there was another need for coordination that led to this massive growth called a cloud, right? Really driven by convenience of compute. And if you look at the actual spend for IT, close to 70% of the spend for all the IT is done by hyperscalers. So if you imagine a world where literally 4 companies are contributing to about 70% of the spend, you can kind of see a world where most hardware is manufactured to tailor the needs of these 4 companies. And it's very reminiscent of the world that we fought so hard to move away from, the world of monopolies, or the world of duopolies, or the oligopolies, we call them, right? In fact, in American history, if you look back what happened in the 1800s, the late 1800s, there was this notion of heavy centralization that led to all kinds of outcomes which ended up in the Great Depression because of this like heavy concentration of buying power by a few companies. And the outcome today, we see quite a lot of hoarding of resources, especially last year when the boom we call the Chat GPT-driven AI boom really led to the scarcity of GPUs. Semaphore, a bunch of articles, a bunch of newspapers wrote, but Semaphore really opened up a story that talked about how people, students and startup companies trying to get access to GPUs to do AI training couldn't get access to GPUs even on the hyperscalers. The only way to get access to GPUs from hyperscalers is to get it into special deals. Now, this is the pinnacle of what heavy centralization leads to. And I mean, this is a story about how the student could go to Akash network and get some GPUs. Highly recommend you reading it. It's the only positive story about crypto after the FTX kaboom. And if you look at the costs, right? Anderson Horowitz did the study. Half of every penny you spend on online services goes to a cloud provider. In some cases like Asana, where over 63% of all the fees you pay to the cloud service goes to a cloud provider, in a way that we are paying this invisible tax, the society, all of us together, we don't even realize we are paying this invisible tax. And the famous incident that happened recently, we saw with CrowdStrike. Not sure how many of them were experienced what happened with CrowdStrike. Love to see a quick show of hands. CrowdStrike is a relatively unknown service that went down and took down the entire nation's airline infrastructure, the hotel infrastructure. No one could travel because somebody pushed bad code to production. It was not a nation-state attack. It was not a failure of data centers. It was not a failure of infrastructure in general. Somebody pushed bad code. That is the fragility we have in the system that we call the cloud, right? And there's enormous examples of just blatant antitrust happening, especially from the likes of Amazon. There's FTC investigations, all kinds of crazy things that are happening, the lawsuits and whatnot, all because few companies can control what we call today the cloud. And what does it mean? What does that centralization really mean? Of course, it leads to higher costs. And the economic inefficiencies, the escalating costs are no longer bearable, right? And the risk of going down this path, well, concentration of power leads to stifling of innovation and will lead to something we call digital feudalism. Feudalistic societies were where few had the power on the many, right? We, as a society, work very hard to create this free market economy, but with this current concentration of power, we are very well going back to this feudalism, especially considering the power AI has to control your thought, the influence, how you think and what you do. And that is a future. That is a bleak future we all are working very hard to avoid. And this is a public sentiment heard across the board, right? I mean, developers and governments and startups even are heavily frustrated with the current state of things, and that gave birth to the decentralized cloud solutions, right? The very concept of decentralized cloud solution is to go back to the founding principles of the internet that created the innovation, that spurred the innovation that we all have experienced, and really the idea is to distribute the nodes in a manner that there's no single point of failure, right? And that's really what we are here to build. And more often than not, I mean, today we see deepened networks with Google logins or passwords or email confirmations. All these represent the single points of failure, working very hard to avoid, right? And this gave birth to this whole sector called DeepIn, right? DeepIn means decentralized physical infrastructure network, and every aspect of infrastructure, be it compute, Akash, be it storage, networks like Filecoin, be it DNSs, be it routing, networks like Sentinel, and a whole lot of networks now that can interoperate with each other have come together to create a realistic alternative to the cloud, which I think is very interesting to notice. And why? Because we need to restore sovereignty, right? With decentralization, individuals and businesses regain control over the data and the resources. And the very essence of decentralization is to empower communities and not necessarily individual companies. The decentralization leads to democratization of access to resources, just like what we saw with the semaphore story, which I couldn't go really into detail, but it talked about a student that couldn't get access to resources on Amazon, but could get access to the same GPUs that he wanted on Amazon, on Akash, sorry, and went about creating a company that eventually got acquired by NVIDIA. So that happened because of a network like Akash and because of decentralization. And the efficiency of cost is very visible. Today we see networks like Akash that can offer up to 85% of the cost that you would otherwise pay Amazon. I mean, in cases like GPUs, where you have H100s or A100s, it costs anywhere from one-fourth the typical cost you would otherwise pay, even for resources that are extremely hard to get, right? And reliability, I mean, Akash has decentralized networks because of the nature, because of the peer-to-peer nature, they tend to not have single points of failure. In case of Akash, Akash has been around for about 4 years and has not gone down a single time. And you can't say quite the same for networks like Amazon, where Amazon has reportedly about 200 outages on average per year. This is the decentralization is obvious lifeblood for innovation, and without the constraints of the hyperscalers, monopolies, open source communities can again thrive and regain the power to innovate. Brief case study about Akash. I mean, Akash, like Zach mentioned, is the world's first decentralized supercloud, and the essence of Akash network is to tap into underutilized resources and effectively create an alternative to networks like Amazon or Google's of the world without needing to experience much differently than using a centralized cloud provider. And the way it works really begins with the tenant, the user that defines the application workload in a containerized image and specifies how much they're willing to pay and where they want the workload to reside, creating an order on the marketplace, and providers that can fulfill the order, bidding on the order to win the order, and eventually leading to a deployment of the application. The protocol itself is extremely simple and extremely efficient, and there's not a single points of failure in the world, and a set of providers all contributing to this incredible super cloud. And Akash has been growing pretty well, and mostly in the AI, because the need for computation has quadrupled. The need for computation, especially for AI, is growing at the rate of a half an order of magnitude every year, right? So today, it is predicted by 2030, about 5% of global GDP will be spent on AI. So Akash has seen incredible growth. Last year, we grew about 1,800%, about 1,700% in user fees, year-over-year growth for the last quarter. And our biggest user today happens to be NVIDIA. And Akash is the only protocol that's integrated into NVIDIA products directly. And some of the amazing innovations in decentralized AI is happening on Akash. So AI training has been traditionally very centralized in the sense that you needed co-located clusters locally present to do any meaningful training, but that changed with Akash. Today we see companies like News Research, companies like Prime Intellect that actually cracked decentralized training. The first billion parameter model by News Research was trained on Akash. First 10 billion parameter model by Prime Intellect is being currently trained on Akash. So every new innovation in decentralized training or AI is being run on Akash, and Akash is in the front and center of this incredible decentralization that we're seeing. The growth has been phenomenal. Like I mentioned, about 700% growth in user fees, about 72% growth quarter to quarter in our in the user fees. And again, in the applications deployed, we saw an incredible growth as well. about 40% growth from quarter 1 to quarter 2. So we are, all this growth is spurred really by AI. And with that, as I leave, I want to leave with one question. As we stand at the crossroads of this incredible technological advancement, the choice is really ours to continue down the path of centralization or to embrace decentralization and unlock a new era of innovation and empowerment. With that, thank you so much for attending.